Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Dulki, Seethawaka from Sri Lanka, and the topic I'm discussing today is Rights of the Voiceless Diplomatic Animals, a critical analysis on the necessity of granting special rights to diplomatic animals. So, animal diplomacy or gifting of live animals has been a common diplomatic practice that has taken place for many years since the history. So when I started this research, I was wondering why it has continued until now. And I tried to find out whether there are any justifications why animal diplomacy has been practiced. First and foremost, I found out that it intends to improve the political relations between two nations, and also it provides an opportunity for the citizens of the receiving country to observe and interact with animals that are often not native to their lands, for example, the pandas and the elephants. And it further develops animal research if the receiving nation is a developed nation which possesses advanced science and technology. And also it provides an opportunity for the animal to thrive as opposed to the wild habitats where he could be more vulnerable or endangered. However, evidence around the world suggests that the welfare concerns of diplomatic animals have not always been satisfactorily met. Why? Mostly because national laws on animal protection are different, and also this is a very sensitive topic because it involves political relations, and often the sending country does not want to interfere even if the diplomatic animals are mistreated or neglected. So then I questioned whether, since diplomatic animals are some sort of diplomatic agents that are sent from one country to the other to develop their relations, whether they are protected by international law. But unfortunately, there are no specific international instruments which recognize the rights of diplomatic animals. And in my research, I'm trying to discuss three concepts and frameworks, namely Panda Diplomacy, Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations 1961, and also Universal Declaration on Animal Rights, to find out whether we can identify some rights that are applicable to diplomatic animals. So before that, let me take you to Sri Lanka for 2 minutes. So this is a very famous religious parade that happens in Sri Lanka in many temples. As you can see, these elephants are in chains. Often, if you can see, their legs are in chains. Often these festives would last for a week, at least a week. And throughout this time, these elephants are supposed to be in restraints, as in chains, because they are in public spaces. Even the proposed Animal Welfare Bill of 2022 in Sri Lanka has legalized that, and it has a provision which says that if elephants are in public spaces, then they must be in restraints. However, in the long term, these chains and restraints cause so many welfare concerns to the elephant, including arthritis, abscesses, limp legs, and other permanent scars. Secondly, as you can see, their costumes are often lighted. These are electric bulbs, and usually there is a generator which is carried behind a lorry behind those elephants, and it generates power which light up those costumes. Hopefully, I don't really know. I haven't done the research as to how safe these costumes are, but there is the possibility that the lives of the elephant is endangered in this situation as well. And also, this pagoda that is the tooth relic usually is on its back is usually quite heavy, and I'm sure you are aware that elephants are not really supposed to carry heavy weights on their backs because it's not good for their bone structure. Adding more, as you can see in the right back, there are fire lamps that are taken. So this is a form of lightening the space and showing people more of the parade. But elephants are actually scared of fire. but still they have to deal with that distress and fear while they are walking, probably to many kilometers throughout the night. More, the drums, the sounds are really interfering because they are very sensitive animals. Plus, they have to stay hungry and probably without drinking water throughout until the parade is over. And often these bull elephants or the male elephants, they do not have any partners. They do not reproduce. They are usually living or staying, they are with an owner currently who take care of these animals and probably rent to those parrots. So why I'm discussing this is because of this elephant, which is a diplomatic animal, which was sent from Thailand to Sri Lanka, which is called Muthuraja in Sinhala in Sri Lankan language, but also Saksurin in Thailand. You can search and see the story of Saksurin. So he was sent in 2001 by the Thailand government to Sri Lanka, and he had to stay in a Buddhist temple and had to participate in religious parades throughout his stay. And it was reported that he had been suffering from a limp for several years. So imagine the plight of this elephant having to carry that pagoda on his back, wearing a heavy costume, plus having a limp with all the drums and fire. And adding to more, the mahouts always would complain that Muthuraja or Saksurin does not really respond. It's very difficult to communicate with this animal. And the reason is it has been trained in Thailand language. So there was a communication gap, and he didn't really know what Sri Lankan mahouts were saying, and he was totally lost, and therefore he was called aggressive. And the mahouts had to use extreme methods of controlling this animal because he was in a public space. And the animal rights activists and environmentalists claimed always, they argued and they protested, saying that he was being mistreated and abused by his mahouts. I quote, "The tusker was standing in a pool of water with its hind legs in shackles. He appeared to be in pain and was shifting his weight to his right front leg. His left front leg appeared to be swollen, and he had 2 abscesses on his hind legs." So it shows how much these animals are suffering, even though they are supposed to be diplomatic animals, which in turn develop the relations between 2 nations. So in 2022, after many campaigns, he was sent to the Village Zoo, that is the National Zoological Garden in Sri Lanka, for treatment. But so far, we have not been successful in treating him. And I think Thailand has been requesting since maybe 2015 to send him back, but our government didn't really want to. But now finally, he will be flying to Thailand in July. So it is not that much of a bad ending so far. So I really hope he goes back where he can receive proper care and treatment by the veterinaries in Thailand. And this is the next case, this study of Carven. I hope you have heard about him. So Carven was gifted from Sri Lanka to Pakistan in 1985, and that is the enclosure he used to live, that small enclosure, with his partner Saheli, who died in 2012 of sepsis. So even since Carven was alone, and it was alleged that he was frequently restrained, poked with nailed bullhooks by his handlers. So bullhooks are the kind of a stick with a hook that is used to control elephants. And he gradually fallen into psychosis and obesity with infected injuries and permanent scars. So you can see in the second picture, he would just stay like that with his head on the wall for hours because he was psychologically affected due to losing his companion and being in such a restrained environment. So on 25th April 2020, So a global campaign started in 2015 urging Pakistan to free Carven. And finally, the court, the case went to the Islamabad High Court, and the court recognized that Karvan had actually endured unimaginable pain and suffering through 3 decades, and therefore it is imperative to relocate him and send him to an elephant sanctuary to alleviate his suffering. But the best thing is Sri Lankan government didn't do anything throughout these 30 years when we obviously knew that Karvan was suffering in Pakistan. But finally, Karvan was rescued in November 2020, and now he is living in a sanctuary in Cambodia. So now I'm trying to find out whether, in fact, rights of diplomatic animals can be identified using these 3 concepts and mechanisms. So panda diplomacy is the first one. Leaving aside the fact that there are only 1,864 pandas in the wild and 673 captive pandas in the world, I am not referring to panda diplomacy as a soft diplomatic power used by China to spread their diplomatic powers and international powers or whatever, but I'm just talking about the rights that can be derived from panda diplomacy and can in fact be used to protect the rights of diplomatic animals. So Professor Wan Shenling, in his title China's Panda Diplomacy, recognizes 3 stages of panda diplomacy. In the first stage, which is 1957 to 1982, pandas were gifted to other nations in return for foreign aid or services. And ownership passed from China to those countries in which the animals were sent. And in the second stage, from 1982 to 1994, pandas were given as loans, as commercial goods. But in 1983, China entered into the CITES, and initially, pandas were in Appendix 3. But because they were beginning to become really vulnerable, they had to shift pandas to Appendix 1. And in there, only free gifts of animals could be done only in exceptional circumstances. And therefore, these loaning pandas as commercial goods were heavily criticized both by animal welfare activists, environmentalists, everyone. And then China had to stop that practice. So now what is happening since 1994, which is the third stage, is a bilateral contract of mutual scientific research exchange with the respective country. And it loans the pandas for an annual payment, which is obviously quite high, and not for countries like Sri Lanka. So there are some conditions that were laid down for panda diplomacy in the CITES notification to the parties number 932 of 4 September 1996. First and foremost, any pandas are exported as a loan only for 10 years, which means after the 10 years, they have to be sent back to China. And all offsprings that are born to those pandas, the ownership remains with China. And after 2 years, once the panda baby turns 2 years old, they have to also be sent back to China. And the next one is export of such pandas must ensure positive conservation benefits. That means they cannot be sent to, to be used in religious parades or anything in the example of Muthuraja. And exporting pandas which are suitable for breeding must be authorized only in exceptional circumstances. And I have also observed that all this time they were sent in pairs. So let's say one panda dies while the other one is alive. China will send another panda to make sure that that panda is not left alone, that it will always have a partner or companion. And then, so this loan, that is the annual payment that is being paid by the receiving country to China, the excess financial benefits after deducting the expenses must be reserved for the conservation of pandas in China, so it has deeper conservation efforts as well. And a memorandum of agreement defining all the conditions must be signed between the management authority, the institution in China which is loaning the panda, and the receiving country. So they cannot really take the animal and do whatever they want, but have to make sure that they stick to all the conditions that are laid down by China. So I'm trying to identify what rights can be granted to diplomatic animals inspired by panda diplomacy. First and foremost, all offspring born in other nations must be returned to China after 2 years. This could be recognized as a right to grow up in their native land, which can also prevent inbreeding. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it is possible. And also gifting pandas in pairs, right to companionship, right to reproduction. Pandas must be returned to China after 10 years, right to return to their native land, their familiar surroundings, and then signing a memorandum between the two nations, which clearly gives out the duties and responsibilities of both nations, right to proper care and protection, and right to be treated with dignity and respect. Okay, so this is the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations 1961, which has set certain privileges and immunities to diplomatic persons. So I'm trying to identify which can be related to diplomatic animals, because they are also some form of a diplomatic persons if we take them. So Article 10(1)(a), the duration of the mission, there's a limitation. They can arrive and they can depart. It's not that they have to be stuck in one country. That is right to return to their native land. Article 10(1)(b) and (c), permission for family members and even private servants to go with the diplomatic person. So right to companionship. In the case of Muthuraja, if the person who was communicating with Muthuraja in Thai language was sent, then imagine the difference it would have made for the poor animal. And Article 21(2), suitable accommodation and protection, that is right to proper care. And Article 31, security and protection to the private residents, that is again right to protection. So this is the Universal Declaration on Animal Rights. Unfortunately, I couldn't find how applicable this is and how many countries are actually involved in recognizing this. But I read that it has been solemnly proclaimed on 15th October 1978 at UNESCO House in Paris. There are 14 articles, of which I have identified some articles that could be related to the rights of diplomatic animals as well. So all animals are entitled to respect. All animals are born with an equal claim on life and same rights to existence, so far and so forth. I will be referring to these lately also. So the question is, what can an international convention which protect the rights of diplomatic animals can actually do? First and foremost, it can secure the rights of diplomatic animals, especially if those countries are not recognizing animal rights or animal sentience or animal welfare protection. And also it could be legally binding. The legally binding nature of an international convention could also be effective in protecting diplomatic animals. And in the long run, it can impose a universal duty on the receiving countries to protect both physical and mental well-being of animals. At the same time, a duty on the sending country to make sure that throughout this stay, the diplomatic animals are not neglected from their own nation as well. And it can mandate a set of internationally accepted minimum conditions which must be fulfilled by both countries to safeguard diplomatic animals. And of course, there will be conflicts, so we need an administrative committee to resolve any conflicts that are likely to take place. So there are challenges. First, it must be ensured that the proposed international convention will not tarnish the goodwill among nations, which was the major concern when it comes to interfering with the diplomatic animals that were mistreated and neglected. The convention would not challenge the sovereignty of the states, and some states might not be willing to commit themselves to protect the diplomatic animals or recognize their rights. And there could be challenges as to domestic implementation of the convention, as is the case of CITES, where there must be a separate national frameworks to implement the CITES convention into the national frameworks. Yes, yeah. So these are the recommendations on rights of diplomatic animals that I have recognized. So this is an ongoing research, so it's just still in the beginning. So I have divided into Panda Diplomacy, Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, and a Universal Declaration on Animal Rights. And in conclusion, what I want to say is that and diplomatic animals are often mistreated, especially if they are sent to those countries which do not protect animal rights, animal welfare, or animal sentience. And I'm not saying that I do accept this practice. I think we can do better. But at the same time, since it has been a practice that has taken place for so long, and for sure it's going to take some time to make some changes, we can consider putting some extra effort to protect the diplomatic animals, their rights, and their welfare. And I'm going to finish it off by saying diplomatic animals are not given the choice to select the lives they want. It is decided by the governing authorities in each nation. However, it must not be used as an excuse to tamper with their lives. As humans, steps must be taken to ensure that diplomatic animals are not left to suffer alone in unfamiliar lands. Thank you very much.